For the first time in hours, the angry sound of her father's voice was muted, covered by the wind, so that if she concentrated hard, she could almost pretend that sound was a part of the rising storm, rather than a proof of her father's fury and her mother's terror. Then her father was looming in the doorway, his eyes hard, his anger suddenly directed toward her. She cringed on the sofa. Perhaps if she made herself smaller, he wouldn't see her. "The cellar," her father said, the softness of his voice making it no less threatening. "I told you to go to the cellar."
"Father?"
"Storm's coming. You'll be safe in the cellar. Now go on." Hesitantly, the child stood up and began edging toward the kitchen door, her eyes flickering once, leaving her father's angry face to focus on the door behind him, the door beyond which her mother lay struggling with the pains of labor.
"She'll be all right," he said.
Not reassured, but knowing argument would only increase her father's wrath, the girl pulled a jacket from a hook and struggled to force her arms through its tangled sleeves. Then, shielding her eyes from the driving wind with her right arm, she left the house and scuttled across the yard to the cyclone cellar that had been carved out of the unyielding prairie earth so many years ago. Once, she glanced up, squinting her eyes against the stinging dust. In the distance, almost invisible in the roiling clouds, she could barely make out the beginnings of the storm's angry funnel. More terrified now of the storm than of her father's anger, she grasped the heavy wooden door of the cellar and hauled it part way open, just far enough to slip her body through the gap. She scrambled down the steep steps, letting the door drop into place behind her. For what seemed like an eternity, she sat in the near-total darkness of the storm cellar, her ears filled with the sounds of the raging winds. But sometimes, when the howlings of the storm momentarily abated, she thought she could hear something else. Her mother, calling out to her, begging her to come and help her. The girl tried to ignore those sounds. It was impossible for her mother's voice to carry over the storm. Besides, she knew what was happening to her mother, and knew there was nothing for her to do. When the baby came and the storm had passed, someone, her father or her brother, would come for her. Until then, she would stay where she was and try to pretend she wasn't frightened. She curled herself up in a corner of the cellar and squeezed her eyes tight against the darkness and the fear. She didn't know how much time had passed, knew only that she couldn't stay by herself any longer, couldn't stay alone in the cellar. She listened to the wind, tried to gauge its danger, but in the end, she wrapped the jacket close around her thin body and forced the cellar door open. The wind caught it, jerked it out of her grasp, then tore it loose from its hinges and sent it tumbling across the yard. It caught on the barbed wire fence for a moment, then the wire gave way and the wooden door hurtled on, flipping end over end across the plains, quickly disappearing into the gathering dust. The girl huddled at the top of the steps for a few moments. There was a light on in the house now, not the bright light she was used to, but the glow of a lantern, and she knew the power had gone out. The flickering lamplight drew her like a moth, and she braced herself against the driving wind, leaning into it as she began making her way back across the yard. She was disobeying, she knew, but even facing Pa's anger was better than staying alone any longer. Still, when she reached the house, she couldn't bring herself to go in, for even over the howling wind, she could hear her father's voice. His words were unintelligible, but his anger was terrifying. The girl crept around the corner of the house, crouched low, until she was beneath the window of the room in which her mother lay. Slowly she straightened up, until she could see into the room. On the nightstand stood an oil lantern, its wick turned low, its yellowish light casting odd shadows. Her mother looked almost lifeless, resting against a pillow, damp hair clinging to sallow skin, her eyes wide, staring balefully at the towering figure of her father. And now she could hear the words. "You killed him." "No," her father replied. "He was born dead." The little girl watched as her mother's head moved, shaking slowly.